Hey guys, all right, let's render a cylinder. And again, a cylinder is, one of the, again, a simpler sort of, form to render. In this case, I'm going to construct it out a little bit more because one of the tricks is, especially when I'm rendering it from this angle, is again, if you want it to feel and look like a cylinder, you kind of have to make sure that the thing that it's sort of sitting in is sort of square, right? It's almost sitting in like like a long sort of square sort of box, if that makes sense. So again, I'm still guessing, right? I'm still fudging that it's that sort of depth, but I'm trying to make sure that it's sort of close because I tried a couple of other times, and yeah, you sort of end up, if you're not careful and you don't guess sort of right, you end up sort of rendering something which isn't a sphere, which sort of isn't sort of circular at each sort of end, and then often the rendering assumptions you make based, like talking about a cylinder, are off. So I think it is worthwhile sort of drawing this one out. There's some things you can fudge. You can fudge the depth a bit, but if you run into trouble and you're like, whoa, this is not looking right, again, make sure you draw the back face of the of that sort of box that it's sitting in. Make sure that's all working. Otherwise, yeah, you can end up in trouble if you're not sure, like, for instance, what the difference is between how open and closed the ellipses are at either end. It'll look kind of funny. It'll look a little bit off. So just drawing that box initially, making sure that you're doing, a decent guess of, making it square, that'll get you off to a good start. And again, remember, as you're drawing those circles, pay attention to kind of ellipse rules as you draw them. You can see I've sort of, again, I'm still doing a bit of fudging, right, in terms of like how I fit those spheres, the sort of the circles, into the boxes and stuff. It's a little bit sort of messy, but it gives me something that's fairly easy to start with. So something you can really do rendering wise to help yourself with this is, again, just to kind of start with some sort of circular shapes, right, using the ellipse tool, filling that on a layer. So I've got these kind of floating circles or floating ellipses that are around the place. Then you can see I can do what I've done here, right? So I've actually copied that ellipse which is sort of closest to us, right, which actually we're going to see, and I've put that on a layer. So I copied that, and then all the other ones I kind of flattened down, so that's one shape, and then I'm clipping that ellipse, the one on the left, to the shape, and that will allow me to, as you can see shortly, use it as a layer to render. So again, if this is like, I'm not sure what the hell you're talking about, again, just try it, play around with it, but that ellipse on the left, it's good to have that as a separate layer, because that means, again, I can render under it like I'm doing. And then I can sort of, lock that layer, that ellipse layer on the left there, and sort of paint it separately. So again, this is where I'm using Photoshop to the full of its abilities. I'm not messing around. I'm not trying to do this, in any sort of technical, old school way. Because it's sort of faster to do that, and it's also really useful to learn how to separate things out, how to basically get your hard edges, how to get your soft edges, and how to use whatever medium you're using to help you do that. Right? Every medium will have techniques and ways for you to do that. If you're airbrushing, typically, like airbrushing with a real airbrush, you'll use very similar techniques, right? Where you're kind of trying to hold edges, and you'll have masks and things like that to kind of make sure you get a hard edge here, and then you use the airbrush to get a soft sort of transition. And even if you watch people do these kind of exercises with marker, they'll frequently do things to kind of help mask edges. If you're rendering a cube, you'll get a bit of paper, hold it up against that edge, so that when you try and get that soft transition, you're obviously not kind of going out all over the place. So it's, again, I think one of the preconceptions you have is kind of, coming from sort of high school or something like that, or if you don't have any sort of technical art education, is you just imagine that people are just doing everything with pencils. Do you know what I mean? That people are just kind of painting with exactly the same brush. But, there's a huge portion, an absolutely gigantic proportion of process when it comes to drawing and painting and rendering is understanding your medium, right? And understanding that, you need to go from large to small shapes. You need to go from large to small marks. You need to think big and then think specific later on. So, and that really, 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 really helps to give you that kind of quality sort of finish. So it's the same thing here, right? Photoshop is good at doing certain things. And it's important to kind of follow along with that and figure out how your medium helps you do, get basically the marks that you want where you want quickly and easily. And that's the same. You can't escape that traditionally. You know what I mean? It's not like people don't have tricks when they're doing these things traditionally. For instance, people might, if they're doing this as a traditional thing, you might get halfway through rendering it and then you would photocopy the image you've got. You would then cut out the cone and then use that as a mask. Use the bit of paper, both the negative and the positive shape, to maybe sort of rub that sort of black sort of shadow behind the object, and also to maybe like clean up any sort of edges, or maybe make sure that your kind of marks within the object are kind of clean as well. So similar thing, we've got layers in Photoshop. This is so easy in Photoshop. Photoshop makes this way more easy and a lot cleaner. You don't have charcoal all over the place. So yeah, figure out how these things work. Okay, this is your medium. This digital stuff is your medium, whether you like it or not. It's important to know how to use it. And it's probably easier and quicker to learn than any other medium out there. If you're doing this in acrylic or charcoal or whatever, you're going to have an equal amount of sort of fussing around and using technical things that aren't just like painting with paintbrushes. Especially if you want any kind of technical or sort of clean look. You know what I mean? So yeah, get used to doing that and figuring out how can I get this effect that I want in Photoshop. So you can see again the concept of a cylinder is fairly simple. We just have like a smooth transition from light to shade, and we've got that core shadow or that terminator. It's important to understand that the terminator or the core shadow is sort of linked in perspective. Understand where it's going to happen. It's going to happen right at that midpoint of the cylinder. And obviously the sort of the left sort of circle that we can see, that kind of end of the cylinder, that's almost like the side of a cube, right? It's just looking out and seeing like an endless kind of horizon, right? So treat it exactly the same as you would treat the square face of a cube, right? There's absolutely nothing different. What might be different is, again, you can see I found some tricky creative ways to get those highlights. They can help a little bit to kind of separate those planes out. That can be really useful. In this case, I'm just using the shadow casting that goes straight down, which is a really simple tool for a cylindrical kind of shadow casting, because otherwise it gets sort of complicated because you've got to calculate the round edges. But yeah, and a lot of what I'm doing is just sort of trying to figure out the ambience, right? The space around it, and often that makes it look and feel a little bit more realistic than actually playing with the object itself. So again, object and environment are linked. Their ambient lights are linked. The way that they're lit is linked. The way it's lit from the top, that same light is hitting the ground. So you have to make sure they kind of line up and they sort of feel good together. But yeah, that's basically that's all there is to it. The cylinder is fairly simple. A lot of it is just managing those transitions, managing those edges, and yeah, then just sort of finessing it, right? Like making sure that those highlights on the edges are working well. Giving your shadows a little bit of blur, and then just kind of making sure everything fits together and works well together. So yeah, cylinders are a good one to practice, and you can either draw it on its side or kind of standing up, or whichever way you want. So yeah, good luck with this one, guys. Have fun, and yeah, let me know if you've got any questions.